When I was 14, my dad slapped me twice and threw me out into a snowstorm. All because my sister lied about me. I nearly froze to death, but my mom stepped in and made sure justice was finally served. That door slamming shut wasn't just a sound. It was a physical blow, a crack that split my world apart on a blizzard-whipped night. I stood there, freezing, shoeless, coatless in the whirling snow, my cheek burning from my father's hand. And through the glass, I saw my sister Hannah, a slow, sickening smile on her face as she turned away. It was December in Wisconsin, and darkness had already swallowed the day by 5:30. Our kitchen, usually a warm, busy place, felt strangely quiet that evening as I hunched over my math equations. The numbers blurred. Outside, the snow was piling up, thick and fast. The weather service had been screaming warnings all day, a frantic chorus against the deepening hush of the storm. But Hannah, my 17-year-old sister, a master of getting what she wanted, had decided she absolutely needed to go to the mall with her friends. For once, our dad had stood his ground. The roads were already a treacherous canvas of ice and white, visibility dropping with every breath. The storm was only getting worse. I watched Hannah's face shift through a quick succession of emotions, surprise at being told no, then a flash of pure rage, and finally, that cold, disturbing flicker of calculation. She stomped upstairs, the slam of her bedroom door rattling the cheap frames in the hall. Me? I was just grateful to be invisible for a change, a ghost in the growing family drama. But here's the thing about invisibility. You never truly understand the dark currents beneath the surface until something shatters the illusion of peace. What happened next still plays out in my memory, a loop of terror I can't seem to stop seeing. About 25 minutes later, Hannah reappeared at the bottom of the stairs. Her makeup was smudged, her shirt ripped just so at the neck. The sobs racked her body. But these weren't the furious, resentful tears from before. No, this was a deliberate, dramatic performance, punctuated by gasping hyperventilation. Dad dropped his newspaper. The rustle was shockingly loud in the quiet room. His face drained of color. The story she spun was elaborate, a tapestry of deception woven with vivid, devastating details. She accused me of following her upstairs, of attacking her for being the favorite, pushing her against the wall, ripping her clothes, venomously declaring, "I wish you'd never been born." Each charge, delivered between believable, painful cries, was more absurd than the last. She claimed I'd been plagued by envy for years, had threatened her before, but she'd been too scared to speak up. It was a textbook example of pathological manipulation, fabricating intricate lies, not spontaneously, but with premeditation. She understood exactly how to use apparent victimhood to shift blame and control the narrative, playing on our family's emotional weaknesses. My father slowly rose. His gaze, when it landed on me, was something I'd never seen directed at me before, cold, hard rage. My voice was a terrified whisper as I tried to plead. I pointed to my math homework scattered across the table, the fresh pencil lines and half-solved problems, as undeniable proof that I'd been right there, in plain sight, the entire time. He didn't listen. Maybe he was already too angry, too caught up in Hannah's seemingly genuine pain to hear logic. Or maybe her act was just that compelling. She'd always been theatrical, capable of conjuring tears on demand, but I never believed she'd use those talents against me. He grabbed my arm, yanking me out of the chair so violently that my water glass shattered on the tile floor. Its breaking sound was a dreadful punctuation mark to Hannah's renewed, dramatic sobs. He kept making aggressive accusations. How dare I hurt my sister? What kind of person was I becoming? He'd raised me better than this. He'd given me everything. Was this how I repaid him? His grip on my arm tightened, an involuntary cry of pain escaping me, which only seemed to fuel his fury. He thought I was mimicking Hannah, putting on a show. My mom, bless her sensible heart, was 4 states away, caring for her sister after surgery, something Hannah had definitely factored into her timing. Mom would have questioned, scrutinized, investigated. Dad simply reacted. The first slap landed with a brutal force that stole my breath, stunning me into a silence deeper than any cry. My face burned with searing, furious heat, and I tasted the metallic tang of blood where my teeth had sliced the inside of my mouth. He'd never been a violent man. I'd never even been spanked as a child. But something in Hannah's story had unlocked a wrath in him I never knew existed. The second blow sent me staggering backward, my hips smashing hard onto the kitchen counter. Hannah's tears had stopped. Through the spinning haze of pain, I saw her watching from the doorway, her face interested, devoid of fear or shock. Just satisfaction. The look of someone whose meticulously planned strategy was playing out exactly as expected. That expression, that icy, smug sparkle in her eyes, told me everything about how premeditated this treachery was. This instant, exaggerated reaction from my father, prompted by Hannah's tale, was a perfect example of confirmation bias mixed with a deep emotional trigger. He already believed in Hannah's victimhood, and her performance just reinforced that, overriding any critical thought or questioning of the facts. People in such a heightened emotional state are easily blinded to contradicting evidence. Dad hauled me to the front door. Despite my desperate pleas, my hoarse assurances that I hadn't done anything wrong, the storm outside had worsened. The wind shrieked around the corners of the house. Snow piled against the porch railing. He shoved me out into the bitter cold, barefoot, gloveless, wearing only the light jacket I'd worn to school. The door slammed behind me, and I heard the sickening thud of deadbolts locking. The cold hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs. The wind tore at my meager clothes, and the snow quickly soaked through my socks. I pounded on the door, yelling until my throat was raw, but no one responded. Hannah stood at the window, arms folded, watching me freeze. She grinned, then turned away. I had no choice but to move. Standing still meant succumbing to the cold. And even at 14, I understood the terrifying seriousness of my situation. My best friend Sophie lived 5 streets away. On a normal day, it was a quick walk. But in this blizzard, it felt like an impossible polar expedition. The snow had already blurred the lines between yard and street, turning the neighborhood into a hazardous, homogeneous white expanse. Visibility was barely 10 feet. Streetlights were useless halos in the swirling pandemonium. Walking was agonizing. Snowdrifts grabbed at my feet, and I fell twice, my hands sinking into drifts that reached almost to my waist. My fingers were already numb, my face burning from frostbite. The wind became an unseen force, pushing, dragging, disorienting, relentless. My feet were phantom limbs. My lungs burned from the cold air. Every house I passed was a beacon of warmth, of safety, glowing through the swirling snow. I saw families moving around their kitchens, kids watching TV in cozy living rooms, normal Saturday night activities playing out as I fought for my life outside. Shame, a frigid companion, kept me from knocking, from pleading for rescue. How could I explain this? What words would make sense? My father threw me out. Sophie's house loomed through the snow like a mirage, bringing an unexpected surge of hope. My frozen brain had acted on sheer, desperate instinct. The porch light was on, a beautiful golden beacon. I staggered up their driveway, tripped twice climbing the porch stairs, and collapsed against the front door. My fists were too numb to bang, so I kicked the wood. I was sure the storm's fury would drown out the weak thumps. Then the door opened. Sophie's mom, Mrs. Collins, gasped. Mrs. Collins, a woman I'd known since 2nd grade, pulled me in without a word, her warm hands cradling my icy face as she called for her husband. They swaddled me in blankets, sat me by their roaring fireplace, and brought me hot cocoa, which I couldn't even grip, my fingers wouldn't cooperate. Sophie appeared in her pajamas, her eyes wide with shock. The Collins family, bless them, didn't press for explanations right away. Mrs. Collins carefully examined my face, her expression tightening into a hard knot when she saw the bruises already blooming on my cheek and jaw. Mr. Collins, a quiet man, went upstairs and returned with dry clothes, thick socks, a huge sweater. They just let me sit there and defrost, the uncontrollable shivering lasting for what felt like hours as my body struggled to regain warmth. But that was just the beginning of the horror. Eventually, the words started to come, first in fragments, then in a raw, unstoppable torrent as the full story poured out. Hannah's lies, Dad's terrifying reaction, the violent expulsion into the snow. Mrs. Collins's face shifted between shock, fear, and a furious, protective rage. Mr. Collins grew incredibly silent, the kind of silence that felt heavier and more menacing than any scream. They tried calling my house. No answer. They tried 4 more times over the next hour. The same chilling result. Dad was either deliberately ignoring the phone or had simply turned off the ringer, a habit he sometimes indulged in when he wanted silence. Mrs. Collins left a message on the answering machine. Her voice was carefully controlled as she explained I was safe with them. She didn't mention the terrible state I'd arrived in, but her tone was unmistakably glacial. Sophie and I had been inseparable since 2nd grade, and her parents knew my family well. Mrs. Collins had always liked and respected my mother's work as a nurse. She'd been cordial, if somewhat cool, to my father, and now, with the chilling clarity of hindsight, I understood why. She'd most certainly noticed something, some small warning sign of the aggression he'd kept hidden until that night. Sleep was impossible. I lay in Sophie's guest room, safe and warm. Yet, my mind kept replaying the evening's events. Hannah's calculating face haunted me most. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst of rage. It was meticulously planned, orchestrated, precisely timed for Mom's absence. But why? What had I done to deserve such venom from my own sister? The answer came with the morning light, shining through the curtains like a sharp revelation. Hannah had wanted to go to the mall. Dad said no. She needed to divert his attention, to create a situation so severe that her requests would be forgotten. I had been convenient collateral, a sacrifice she was willing to make to distract him, a pawn in her twisted game. The realization churned in my stomach, a sharp metallic taste. My mother arrived at the Collins house at 8 a.m. Sunday. The blizzard had finally passed, leaving 3 feet of new snow and roads that were only half cleared. Mom must have driven through treacherous conditions to get home early, putting her sister's recovery on hold in the face of this unexpected, desperate need. Mrs. Collins had finally reached her late the night before and carefully explained the situation. Mom's expression when she saw me was devastating to witness, a mask of grief and a rising, terrifying wrath. Mrs. Collins had painstakingly photographed my injuries with her digital camera, preserving the evidence before it could fade. The pictures showed a clear handprint on my cheek, another bruise on my jaw, and finger-shaped marks on my upper arm where Dad had grabbed me. My mother examined each shot, her face darkening with every click. She held me tight, as if I might shatter. Her hands trembled as she traced my face, studied the bruises, taking in the terrible act perpetrated against her daughter. I had never seen my mother cry before. She was always pragmatic, stoic, dealing with situations with the same calm efficiency she did in the hospital. But tears streamed down her cheeks as she listened to my account of the previous night, and something fundamental, irreversible, shifted behind her eyes. This was a watershed moment in our family dynamic, a tipping point where the old equilibrium, however dysfunctional, could no longer hold. The mother, who had previously facilitated through her absence or passive acceptance, now became the driving force for change, fueled by a sharp understanding of profound betrayal and danger. Her reaction demonstrated the psychological power needed to confront abuse and establish firm boundaries. The journey home was silent. Mom's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white, yet her expression remained oddly serene. It was the look she wore when dealing with difficult patients, a mask of controlled rage. I watched her profile and felt something unexpected. Hope. Maybe things wouldn't be okay. They would never be the same, but they would definitely be different. When we walked in, Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, reading the Sunday paper, just like any other morning. He looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to horror when his gaze landed on me. The bruises, now a vivid purple and yellow, told their own compelling story. He opened his lips to speak, but Mom raised her hand, a quiet, uncompromising demand. When she spoke, her voice was calm yet powerful, like a tidal wave. Don't talk. Just listen. Hannah appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, hair tangled from sleep. She froze, calculations flashing across her face as she tried to assess the situation. Mom turned to her, and whatever my sister saw in that expression made her take an involuntary step backward. Mom presented the facts, calmly and dispassionately. The timing was unequivocal, confirming I had been at the kitchen table when Hannah claimed I'd attacked her. She had the testimony of the Collins family, who had sheltered me. She had irrefutable photographs documenting the violence Dad had inflicted. And she had the medical evaluation Mrs. Collins had insisted on that morning, which confirmed minor frostbite on my fingers and toes. exposure-related injuries that could have been fatal. Blocks in that storm, she explained, had been a potentially deadly distance. Dad tried to interject, to explain he'd been protecting Hannah, that he'd believed his daughter, that he'd reacted in the moment. Even he recognized his justifications were hollow. I could tell. His face turned bleak as Mom calmly detailed the snowy conditions, the brutally low temperatures, and the very real probability that I might not have survived. Then Mom turned to Hannah. Tell the truth now. My sister's face cycled through the usual rapid-fire sequence: defiance, followed by calculation, then pure, unadulterated dread. She was good at lying, but not good enough to fool our mother, especially when Mom was staring at her with that cold, clinical expression. The stillness grew oppressive, stifling, until Hannah's shoulders slumped in surrender. The confession came, unwillingly, followed by a terrible quiet. She had wanted to go to the mall. She'd been upset at being told no. She had decided to create a diversion. Yes, she had ripped her own clothes. Yes, she had purposefully smudged her makeup. Yes, she had fabricated the entire narrative about me attacking her. Her voice was tiny, almost inaudible, when she finally admitted it. Nothing like the confident performance from the night before. Dad's face was ashen. He stared at Hannah as if seeing her for the first time, then at me, then back at Mom. The awful realization of what he had done finally sank in. He had beaten and expelled his innocent daughter based on a deliberate falsehood. He had almost killed me because he was too eager to believe a theatrical performance. His hands began to shake uncontrollably. Mom's response was meticulous, precise, and utterly crushing. That morning, she had already made phone calls from the Collins residence. Things had already been set in motion and could not be stopped. Dad would be moving out immediately, she informed him. Not eventually, not after they discussed it. Now, she had just called a divorce attorney. Papers were being prepared to be filed Monday morning. The home would be sold. She had already met with a real estate agent and arranged for an appraisal. Everything but custody would be divided equally. She would have complete custody of me, and no visitation with him until I decided I wanted contact. Not if I decide, she clarified, but when I decide. On my terms, on my timeline. Until then, you have no parental rights, in my opinion. Dad tried to argue, claiming it was a mistake, that he deserved another chance to make things right. Mom's expression remained unchanging, like a granite wall. One mistake, she acknowledged, but a mistake that nearly killed your daughter. A mistake that showed such catastrophically poor judgment that I can no longer trust you with any authority over our family. You had one job as a father: keep your children safe. You failed spectacularly. To Hannah, Mom's response was equally cold and exact. My sister would finish the school year. Then she would move in with our father, wherever he ended up. She'd made her decision when she lied. Mom said she had decided to exploit Dad's trust, sacrificing her sister for something as insignificant as a trip to the mall. These were not the actions of someone who cherished family, so she would accept the consequences. Hannah protested immediately and loudly. She wailed, "I made a mistake." She hadn't intended for things to go this far. She hadn't expected Dad to react so violently. Mom's expression remained unwavering as the justifications poured forth. Hannah had watched me freeze on the porch, had grinned as I pounded on the door. That was not an error. It was cruel, and there would be repercussions. After experiencing abuse, establishing solid legal and emotional boundaries is crucial to regaining agency and ensuring safety. Legal boundaries, like restraining orders and specific custody arrangements, are vital for protecting victims, while emotional boundaries define acceptable behavior in future interactions, often necessitating the dissolution of toxic ties. Dad packed 2 suitcases under Mom's careful supervision. She followed him around the house, ensuring he only took his own possessions, nothing that might be disputed later. He tried numerous times to apologize to me, his voice cracking, but the words felt empty and hollow. Sorry didn't stop the hitting. Sorry didn't erase the trek through the storm, the horror of freezing, or the awful betrayal of being tossed out by the person meant to protect me. He left before midday. Mom stood by the door, her stance stiff, watching him drive away, disappearing around the corner. Then she turned to Hannah, who had been lingering in the hallway, still unsure if she could talk her way out of trouble. Mom's reaction spoke volumes. No amount of tears would work this time. The next several weeks were a blur of legal processes. Mom handled it all with the same calm efficiency she used in medical situations, checking off items on a mental checklist, filing divorce papers, obtaining a restraining order, listing the house, scheduling therapy sessions. Everything was documented, photographed, recorded. She built such a strong case that Dad's lawyer advised him not to challenge anything. School got complicated. Word had spread about what had happened. Maybe Sophie told someone. Maybe the truth just slips out, as it often does in small towns. Everyone looked at me differently. Teachers were overly kind. My classmates either avoided me completely or tried too hard to be nice. Hannah had it even worse. People had heard she lied, and that her lying almost killed me. Her friends drifted away, unable to trust someone capable of such treachery. Hannah tried to make amends sometimes, but her attempts were awkward and clearly motivated by desperation rather than genuine regret. She missed her friends and the life she'd had. Her deception had ruined everything. Mom watched these attempts with the same clinical detachment, never interfering or softening. There will be consequences, she'd told Hannah. Actions have them. Dad leased an apartment across town, somewhere modest and gloomy that reflected his much-reduced circumstances. The divorce settlement awarded him precisely half of the assets, but half wasn't much after accounting for legal bills and the cost of starting over. His new job paid less, partly because news had spread about his unexpected availability. Nobody seemed to want to hire the dad, who almost killed his kid. He wrote letters that I didn't read and voicemails that I didn't listen to. Mom preserved everything, methodically documenting his attempts to communicate for legal purposes. The divorce process exposed truths about my parents' marriage that I had never known. Mom had been unhappy for years, but she stayed for practical reasons: stability for us kids, financial security, the usual considerations when contemplating splitting up a family. Dad's violence provided her all the rationale she needed. Unequivocal proof that staying was more dangerous than leaving. Dad's counsel tried to portray him as a worried father who overreacted in a state of stress. The tactic failed spectacularly when Mom's counsel submitted the pictures, medical records, and meteorological data from that night, demonstrating how truly dangerous the conditions had been. The judge's grave, uncompromising demeanor as she reviewed the evidence spoke volumes. No amount of legal trickery could justify putting a child out into a blizzard. The custody hearing was brutal. Dad's lawyer called me to the stand and tried to get me to say I wanted a relationship with my father, that I missed him. Tried to get me to apologize, to say I knew he made a mistake. I spoke directly to Dad, studying his expression as I recounted the trek through the storm in graphic, terrifying detail. The numbness creeping through my limbs, the profound confusion, the very real, bone-deep fear that I might die. After 20 minutes, his lawyer stopped questioning me. Hannah also testified, despite her own counsel advising against it. She tried to frame her deception as an impulsive act of a teenager, something she quickly regretted. However, the prosecution produced footage from our doorbell camera. I had no idea this footage existed. It showed Hannah watching me from the porch, a faint, unsettling grin on her face, before she turned away. The film was devastating, impossible to dismiss as typical adolescent folly. She had taken pleasure in my agony. Mom's testimony was clinical and heartbreaking. She went over the timeline, pointing out flaws in Hannah's statement that Dad should have seen if he had bothered to ask questions. She offered proof of Hannah's pattern of manipulation, including minor falsehoods over the years and situations where my sister had twisted the facts to get her way. This had not been a unique instance. There had been an escalation. The judge granted Mom full custody, with wording that made Dad's prospects of obtaining visits nearly impossible. The decision cited his catastrophic failure of judgment, willingness to use violence without evidence, and reckless endangerment of a minor child. You nearly murdered your child, the judge stated, and this court will not give you another chance to do so. During the divorce proceedings, financial discovery revealed that Dad had been concealing money, not in huge quantities, but enough to paint a clear picture of dishonesty. He had a separate bank account, made some investments he never disclosed. Mom's lawyer seized on these revelations, painting a picture of a man who had been duplicitous even before the Hannah incident. The judge adjusted the settlement accordingly, awarding Mom 65% of the marital assets rather than the standard 50-50 split. Dad's parents tried to intervene. They called Mom, suggested family therapy, argued that breaking up the family was too drastic. Mom met with them once, brought the pictures and medical reports, and explained exactly what their son had done to me. They left that meeting in stunned silence, their arguments abandoned in the face of overwhelming facts. They didn't contact us again. We relocated, moving to a smaller home on the other side of town. 3 bedrooms instead of 4, a basic kitchen, but it was ours. Mine and Mom's place, free of treachery or violence. Mom let me choose paint colors for my room, helped me arrange furniture, made sure I had everything I needed. She was kinder with me than she had been before, more cautious, as if I were something precious that had almost been lost. Hannah moved in with Dad in June, right after school ended. The situation was exactly as Mom had promised. Finished the school year in familiar surroundings, then moved to Dad's small apartment. My sister's complaints had dwindled by then, replaced by a sullen resignation. She understood Mom meant every word, and no amount of tears or trickery could change that. The apartment complex where Dad and Hannah ended up was in a rougher part of town, police sirens blaring every night, a parking lot full of cars with expired registrations. Dad's lower income meant less favorable circumstances. Hannah hated it. She'd grown up in a comfortable home in a good neighborhood, with friends who had pools and finished basements. Now she shared a 2-bedroom apartment with thin walls and neighbors who argued so loudly every word could be heard. Her new school was also tougher, full of kids who didn't care about her former social standing. She was a nobody there, just another new girl with an attitude problem. I heard about their struggles through the grapevine, mutual friends, people who knew both families. Dad was drinking more, showing up late to work, barely holding his life together. Hannah was failing classes, getting into fights, spiraling in ways that suggested she finally understood how much she'd broken. Hearing about their decline filled me with a dismal satisfaction. But a larger part just felt empty. School had changed for me too, though in different ways. Teachers who knew me before treated me with caution, as if I might shatter if they pushed too hard. Guidance counselors kept arranging check-ins, asking how I was adjusting, if I needed someone to talk to. The attention was overwhelming, even if I knew it came from concern. My grades actually improved when everything fell apart. With the chaos at home gone, I could focus on my studies, no longer waiting for the next explosion. Mom created a peaceful, organized space that allowed me to concentrate. Math made sense in ways it hadn't before. When I wasn't on edge, English essays flowed with ease. Sophie remained my best friend through everything. Her parents testified at the custody court. Their account of my arrival that night carried substantial weight with the judge. Mr. Collins described my condition in stark medical terms. Early stages of hypothermia, frostbite on exposed limbs, and clear signs of shock and trauma. His testimony made Dad's lawyer visibly uncomfortable. The Collins family never treated me differently, never made me feel like a charity case or a victim. Sophie's house became a second home, a place where normal life could continue. Movie nights, study sessions, meals where the most dramatic moment was forgetting to set the table. Normalcy provided healing in ways that therapy didn't. Mom returned to work with renewed zeal, picking up extra shifts, volunteering, enrolling in training programs she'd previously turned down. I realized she was processing everything through action, burning off her fury and fear by staying constantly busy. On her days off, Mom was completely present, making elaborate dinners, helping with homework, taking me shopping for essentials. The contrast was dramatic, yet sustainable. Her friends rallied around us during those months. Women from the hospital, neighbors from our old block, people I'd known my whole life. They brought casseroles, provided babysitting, forming a crucial support network to fill some of the void left by losing half of our family. Mom gently accepted their kindness, which, at times, could be overwhelming. Dad attempted to rebuild a relationship through letters. Long, meandering pages about regret and growth, promises to change, explanations for why he'd reacted so badly. Mom reviewed each one first, looking for anything problematic, before deciding whether to give them to me. Most went straight into a file folder she kept for legal purposes. The few she offered me felt hollow, like meaningless words on paper, unable to restore what had been done. I tried reading one once, got 3 paragraphs in, before my fury flared so much I had to put it down. He wrote about understanding my perspective, about the therapy he'd started, about trying to regain my trust. Everything sounded like scripts from a self-help book. Empty statements that proved he knew intellectually what he'd done wrong, but didn't feel the crushing weight. I struggled with sleeplessness throughout my first year. I'd lie awake until 2 or 3 in the morning, my mind racing with endless what-if scenarios. What if I hadn't made it to Sophie's house? What if the Collins family hadn't been home? The what-ifs were unending and exhausting. Mom eventually sent me to a sleep doctor, who provided medication that helped, but the dreams still came sometimes. High school started rough. Freshman year brought a building full of classmates who had heard variants of my story. Most of them had become distorted through repeated retelling. Some kids regarded me like a morbid celebrity, asking for details about the snow and the beating. Others avoided me completely, uneasy with the living reminder that parents could be dangerous. I learned to navigate both extremes, keeping my head down and focusing on my studies. Sophie and I ended up in different friend groups that year, a natural progression as people developed distinct interests. She remained kind and continued to invite me to events, but we weren't as close as we had been. The shared trauma had briefly bonded us, but true friendship required more than that. We stayed friendly until graduation, then lost touch as college took us in different directions. Mom started dating when I was 15, taking great care to ensure I was comfortable with anyone she introduced me to. None of the partnerships lasted long. She'd learned to see red flags and walk away at the first sign of dishonesty or anger. Her standards had risen to an almost impossibly high level, which felt fair given what we had been through. One man, James, lasted over 7 months. He was gentle with my suspicions, never pushed too hard, and always respected Mom's boundaries. They'd go out to dinner or the movies while I stayed home, and he'd leave her with nothing but a chaste kiss goodnight on the porch. I admired his discipline, even if I resented his presence. Mom eventually ended it, recognizing that I wasn't ready to share her with anyone. Dad's attempts to re-enter my life intensified around my 17th birthday. Letters became phone calls to Mom's number, which he was not supposed to have. Gifts started showing up on our porch, books, jewelry, items that showed he'd taken an interest in my hobbies. Mom cataloged everything, preserved the receipts and cards, building a dossier to track his boundary infractions. When he showed up at her house one evening, she called the police. Mom came up with the idea for the restraining order, which she executed with the same systematic efficiency she'd used in the divorce. Dad had been explicitly ordered to stay away, yet he had repeatedly disregarded that directive, demonstrating an inability to respect our limits. The court instantly issued the injunction, extending it to include both Mom and me. Dad was apprehended by police the next day when he tried to approach me outside school. Hannah graduated from high school by the narrowest of margins. I heard she barely finished her senior year, skipping so many classes that the school threatened to hold her back. In the photographs I saw on social media, she looked older than her years, more weathered. The girl who had grinned while watching me freeze had transformed into someone I could barely recognize. She moved out of Dad's apartment the day after graduation, crashed with friends, worked minimum wage jobs, and drifted through the following several years without a plan. Social media revealed a string of disastrous relationships and questionable choices, suggesting the usual trajectory of someone who never learned to accept responsibility for consequences. I watched from afar, feeling nothing. Dad had a second episode, which cemented Mom's decision to completely cut him off. He got into a confrontation at a bar, beat someone so hard their jaw broke, and was jailed for assault. The details were murky, but witnesses claimed he had been drinking and became hostile when someone accidentally bumped into him. When alcohol was present, the pattern of aggression that began with me appeared to spread to strangers. His lawyer was able to keep him out of jail, but he couldn't avoid probation, mandatory anger management sessions, and further limits on his ability to spend time with his own children. Not that it mattered. I had already forbidden any communication, and Hannah had gone on to cause her own calamities. Dad had successfully alienated everyone who had ever cared for him. Over the next few months, I saw them occasionally, usually in stores or on the street. Dad always seemed shrunken, smaller than I remembered. Hannah was resentful, her face a permanent frown, implying that life with Dad was not meeting her expectations. I felt nothing when looking at them. No anger, no satisfaction, just a tremendous void where family once was. Therapy helped. Dr. Morrison specialized in trauma, and understood how to help me comprehend what had happened without pushing too hard. She said that betrayal by family members left distinct types of wounds, that recovery was not linear, and that some days were harder than others. She was right. Some mornings I woke up enraged, ready to scream about the injustice of it all. Other days, I simply felt exhausted, weighed down by the sheer gravity of everything that had happened. Mom never questioned her decisions. She had burned down our family, scattered the ashes, and rebuilt something new from the rubble. Just the two of us, figuring out how to be a family with half the members missing. She worked her shifts at the hospital, came home to cook dinner, helped with schoolwork, and did all the typical mom things, but with a newfound, fierce protectiveness. High school came and went. I earned good grades, went to college, and built a life separate from the family I'd lost. Hannah reached out a few times over the years, sending emails implying a desire to reconcile, to restore what she had lost. I never replied. Some things are permanently broken. Dr. Morrison said that was okay. I didn't know anyone forgiveness simply because we shared DNA. Dad died when I was 26. Heart attack, sudden and deadly. I attended the funeral because Mom claimed it would provide closure, even though I wasn't sure I needed it. Hannah was there, older, but with the same calculating glint she'd had at 17. She tried to talk to me about using Dad's death as a bridge to reconnect. I walked away in the middle of her sentence.